My name is Warren Stafford, and I spent 31 years selling commercial insurance in Cincinnati. I know risk. I assess it for a living. So when my son's wife looked me dead in the eye across my own Thanksgiving table and said, "You're being selfish, Warren," I didn't panic. I smiled, and I excused myself to check on the pie. That was the moment I knew Phase 1 was complete. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. And context, in my experience, is everything. I turned 62 in September. I ran a 5K on my birthday, came in 47th out of 203, which I will brag about until I die. I still drive myself to the barber every 3 weeks, still mow my own lawn, still cook a real dinner 4 nights a week. My cholesterol is better than my son's. My doctor, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Ferrara, who does not sugarcoat anything, told me at my last physical that I was in the top percentile of cardiovascular health for my age group. I am not telling you this to show off. I am telling you this because it becomes important later. The way certain people in my life had started to talk about me, as if 62 meant I was already halfway out the door. My wife, Carolyn, passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 58. I held her hand at 7:41 on a Tuesday morning in March, and then I drove home and sat in the kitchen for 6 hours without turning on a single light. That is the worst thing that has ever happened to me, and I have never fully said that out loud before. After Carolyn died, my son, his name is Patrick, became very attentive. He called more. He came by on weekends sometimes. His wife, Gretchen, was polite in the way people are polite when they are performing politeness, rather than feeling it. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. She had never been particularly warm toward me, and I had long since stopped trying to decode why. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, Maisie and Oliver, who are 7 and 9, and the genuine joy of my life. For them, I would do almost anything, and I think, looking back on it, that Patrick knew that. The house I live in is the house where Patrick grew up. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard that Carolyn spent 20 years making beautiful. It sits on a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood called Whitetail Ridge, which sounds fancier than it is. I paid off the mortgage in 2019. The house is mine, fully and completely, and I have never once treated it like a burden or suggested I couldn't manage it. Last spring, Gretchen's parents moved back from Phoenix. Her father, Don, had a mild stroke, not debilitating but enough to shake the family. Her mother, Phyllis, was managing, but Gretchen was stressed. I understood that. I genuinely felt for her. Family health scares are terrifying, and Gretchen was trying to be a good daughter. I respected it. What I did not expect was for my house to become the solution. It started in July, a Sunday afternoon. Patrick and Gretchen came over for lunch with the kids, which was normal. After Maisie and Oliver went out back to play on the old swing set I never took down, Patrick cleared his throat in the way he does when he's about to say something he has rehearsed. "Dad," he said, "Gretchen and I have been talking." I poured myself a second glass of iced tea and waited. He explained it slowly, like he was presenting a business proposal. Don and Phyllis needed more support. Their apartment in Hyde Park was fine for now, but stairs were becoming an issue for Don. The boys, meaning Patrick and Gretchen, had looked at assisted living options, but the good ones had wait lists, and the decent ones cost between $6,000 and $9,000 a month. They couldn't really afford to supplement that long-term on top of their own mortgage. And here, he gestured around my kitchen, the one where I had made Carolyn's mother's pierogi recipe every Christmas Eve for 22 years. Here I had 4 bedrooms, 2 of which sat empty. I said, "You're suggesting Don and Phyllis move in with me?" Gretchen said, "It would only be temporary." I have heard that word used to describe many things in my life. Temporary is rarely temporary. I told them I appreciated them sharing this with me, and that I needed some time to think about it. Patrick looked relieved. Gretchen looked like she had already redecorated the guest room in her head. I did not call my lawyer that night, but I thought about it. Here is something I should explain about my lawyer. His name is Gus Petrakis, and I have known him since 1994. He handled my business incorporation, both of my father's estate matters, and every real estate transaction I have made in the last 3 decades. Gus is 70 years old, still practices full-time, and has a mind like a steel trap and a personality like a retired drill sergeant. When Carolyn got sick, Gus is the one who helped me update every document, will, trust, power of attorney, healthcare proxy, so that nothing would be left ambiguous. He told me then, sitting in his office on Madison Road with the window unit rattling behind him, "Warren, you do this now while your head is clear, so you never have to do it under pressure." I have thought about those words many times since. I didn't say no to Patrick right away. I genuinely tried to consider it. I thought about what it would mean to have two people I barely knew living in my home, people who had a different family dynamic, different habits, different expectations. I thought about the fact that Don's stroke had affected his short-term memory, which Gretchen had mentioned almost in passing, and what that would look like at 6 in the morning when I was trying to get ready for a client call. I thought about Carolyn's garden, her perennial beds along the back fence, and how I still tend them every spring because I can't not, and how I didn't want anyone out there who didn't understand what those plants meant. I also thought about what Gus had told me, years ago, about financial vulnerability in older adults. He hadn't been talking about me specifically at the time. He'd been talking about a client situation he couldn't discuss in detail, but the gist was this: when someone's circumstances change, widowed, retired, isolated, the people closest to them sometimes start seeing them differently. Not always maliciously, but differently. In August, Patrick brought it up again. This time Gretchen was more direct. She said it wasn't just about her parents, it was about me too. "We worry about you alone in this big house, Warren." She had started calling me Warren, which she almost never did. It felt like a rhetorical technique. What if something happens, and there's no one here? I said I had a phone, a security system, and a neighbor named Carl who checked in twice a week. She said that wasn't the same. I said I was aware of that. In September, my birthday month, the month I ran that 5K, I called Gus and had a long conversation. Not about anything specific yet, just to check in, the way I sometimes did. I mentioned, sort of offhandedly, what Patrick and Gretchen had been suggesting. Gus was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me a few questions. Had there been any discussions about finances? Had anyone suggested I needed help managing the house or my affairs? Had Gretchen or Patrick brought up power of attorney or any changes to accounts? I said not yet. He said, "Warren, let me look over your estate documents and we'll have lunch." We had lunch. We updated a few things. Nothing dramatic, just tightening. He reviewed my investment accounts, my trust, the beneficiary designations. He asked if I used a password manager, and I said no, and he gave me a look that made me feel like I was 19 years old again. I went home and set one up that afternoon. I also installed 3 cameras, one at the front door, one at the back porch, and this is the one that mattered most, covering the dining room and the entrance to the kitchen, positioned in a clock on the wall that Carolyn had bought at the craft fair in 2007. It looked completely ordinary. I had looked up Ohio law. Ohio was a one-party consent state for recording in a private residence. I had confirmed this with Gus. I did not know what I was preparing for exactly. I just knew, with the specific certainty that comes from 3 decades of assessing risk for a living, that something was coming, and I would rather be ready. Thanksgiving this year fell on the 28th. I hosted. I always host. Carolyn started that tradition in 1991, the first year we owned this house, when both our families came and we had 17 people around 2 tables pushed together. After she died, people assumed I would stop. I didn't. I bought a new carving knife, learned to make her cornbread stuffing from the recipe card in her handwriting that still lives in the second drawer to the left of the stove, and I kept going. This year, it was Patrick and Gretchen, the kids, my sister Vera and her husband from Dayton, and Gretchen's parents, Don and Phyllis, who I had invited because they were family now and because Carolyn would have done the same. Don is a quiet man. The stroke has made him quieter. He thanked me for the invitation twice. I meant it both times. Phyllis helped me carry dishes without being asked. I liked them. That is the honest truth, and it made everything that happened afterward harder. Dinner was good. The turkey was good. Maisie ate 3 rolls, and Oliver fell asleep on the couch by 7:30. My sister Vera was telling a story about her neighbor's new chicken coop and making everyone laugh. It was, for most of the evening, Exactly what Thanksgiving is supposed to be. Then Dawn and Phyllis said their goodbyes around 8. Vera and her husband left 20 minutes later. And Patrick said he'd put the kids to bed upstairs. They fell asleep at my house sometimes, which I loved. And then he and Gretchen would help me clean up. I was washing the roasting pan at the sink when Gretchen came into the kitchen. She stood there for a moment. Then she said, "We really need an answer, Warren." I turned off the water. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I turned around. I told her the same thing I had told them in July, that I understood the situation with her parents, that I cared about Don and Phyllis, that I also needed to make my own decisions about my own home, and that after a lot of thought, I wasn't comfortable with the arrangement they were proposing. My home was mine. My space was mine. I wasn't refusing out of selfishness. I was refusing because this was the home I had shared with my wife for 25 years, and I needed it to remain my own. Gretchen's expression went flat in a way I had seen before. She said, "Patrick said you'd say that." I said, "Then Patrick knows me well." She said, "You have 4 bedrooms, Warren." 4. You sleep in 1. The other 3 just sit there, while my parents are struggling. I said, "I understand, Gretchen. The answer is still no." Patrick had come back downstairs without me noticing. He was standing in the doorway. He said, "Dad, you're being selfish." Just like that. The same tone he might use to say the weather is cold. Flat and certain. I looked at my son who I had coached in Little League, who I had taught to drive in an empty parking lot off Montgomery Road, who I had helped move into 3 different apartments, and then his first house, who I had sat with in the hospital waiting room when Maisie was born, and who had cried on my shoulder 2 days after Carolyn's funeral when he thought I was asleep. I said, "I'm going to go check on the pie." What I actually did was walk to the dining room table where I had left my phone face down next to the breadbasket. I picked it up. I looked at the clock on the wall. Carolyn's craft fair clock, the one with the wide-angle lens behind the hands. I thought about Gus's lunch and the updated documents, and the password manager, and the one-party consent law. Then Gretchen followed me into the dining room. I don't know exactly what broke in her in that moment. I don't know if she had been holding it together all evening, and the effort finally caught up with her, or if she had decided, somewhere over the turkey and the cornbread stuffing, that this was the night she was going to make something happen. But she picked up a wine glass, one of Carolyn's good crystal glasses, the ones I still use on holidays, and she threw it. It caught me on the left forearm and shattered. The stem broke off clean. There was a cut below my wrist, not deep, but immediate, a bright thin line of red against my dress shirt sleeve. Wine, the last inch of a Malbec I had opened for dinner, ran down over my hand. Nobody moved for a second. I looked at the cut. I looked at the glass on the floor. I looked at Gretchen, whose face had gone white. I looked at Patrick, who was standing in the doorway, with an expression I had never seen on him before and hoped never to see again. I pressed the dish towel I was still carrying against my forearm. I picked up my phone off the table. I typed 4 words to Gus Petrakis, Thanksgiving. She threw glass. Then I said, very quietly, "I'm going to get my jacket." Patrick said, "Dad." I said, "Don't." I got my jacket from the hall closet. I put it on over the dish towel, which I was still pressing against my arm. I walked to the back of the house where the basement door is, and I discreetly removed the memory card from the secondary recorder I had set up there, a backup to the clock camera, covering the dining room from a different angle. Housed in a smoke detector, I had replaced with a model that had a slot for a micro SD card. I put the card in my jacket pocket. Then I walked back through the kitchen, said goodnight to my son and his wife, and drove myself to the urgent care on Reed-Hartman Highway. They cleaned the cut, applied a butterfly bandage and a small wrap, told me to keep it dry for 48 hours. The nurse asked me what happened, and I said I'd broken a glass while doing dishes. She wrote something down. I didn't push it. In the car, sitting in the urgent care parking lot under the fluorescent spillover from the entrance sign, I texted Gus again with more detail. He responded within 4 minutes. He said, "Call me in the morning. Don't let them back in the house tonight." I called Patrick from the car. He answered on the second ring. I told him, calmly and without raising my voice, that I would be home in about 20 minutes, and I would appreciate it if he and Gretchen had gathered their things and the children before I returned. I said I loved him and that I loved the kids, and that we would talk when everyone had some time to settle. He started to say something. Then he stopped. Then he said, "Okay, Dad." They were gone when I got back. The lights were off except for the porch light which Patrick had left on. The kitchen was mostly cleaned up. On the counter, next to the stove, someone had covered the leftover cornbread stuffing with plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. I didn't know if that was Gretchen or Patrick, and it somehow made me sadder than anything else about the evening. I sat down at the kitchen table. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, Woodford Reserve, the bottle I keep for occasions that require it. I looked at the dining room floor where a piece of crystal stem was still sitting against the baseboard. I thought about Carolyn. I thought about the way she used to handle conflict. Direct, always direct, but never cruel. She would have known exactly what to say to Patrick in that doorway. She had a gift for making people feel seen even in the middle of disagreement. I did not inherit that gift from anywhere. What I inherited was stubbornness and a good memory for details. I called Gus at 7:50 the next morning. He had already pulled up the relevant Ohio statutes. What Gretchen had done, throwing an object that made contact and caused injury, met the threshold for criminal assault under Ohio Revised Code 2903.13. It was, under the circumstances, a first-degree misdemeanor which carried up to 180 days in jail and up to a $1,000 fine. Whether I pursued that was my decision. Gus said he wasn't advising me either way, but he wanted me to know what I had. I also had, he reminded me, 2 video recordings of the incident from different angles in my own dining room. I had a medical record from urgent care documenting the injury. And I had, he noted with the dry satisfaction of a man who has spent 50 years being right about things, a set of estate documents so thoroughly locked down that no informal pressure, no suggestion that I was struggling alone or needed help managing things, could touch them without my explicit witness consent. I told him I didn't want to ruin my son's life. He said, "Warren, your son did not throw the glass." That was true, and it mattered. I asked Patrick to meet me for coffee 3 days later without Gretchen. He came. He looked like he hadn't slept much. I hadn't slept much either, but I have a good poker face from years of sitting across from underwriters who are looking for any reason to raise a premium. I did not lecture him. I did not present the video footage. I did not mention Gus or the legal statutes. I just said I ordered us both black coffee, and I said, "I need you to understand that what happened in my dining room was not acceptable, and I need to know that you understand that." Patrick wrapped both hands around his mug. He stared at it for a moment. He said, "I know, Dad. I know it wasn't." I said, "How long has she been pushing this?" He was quiet. I said, "Patrick, I'm not asking to put blame on anyone. I'm asking because you're my son, and I'm watching you carry something." He said, very quietly, "Since January. Before Dawn's stroke, before the whole framing around her parents needing help, before any of it." I let that sit. I said, "I love you. I love those kids more than I can tell you, and I'm not going anywhere. But this is my home and my life, and those are not things I will negotiate, not with anyone." He nodded. He didn't say much after that. But when we left, when he hugged me in the parking lot of the coffee shop, a real hug, the kind I hadn't gotten from him in years, I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly. I did not press charges against Gretchen. That is a decision I made deliberately, and I stand by it. I filed a police report. Gus advised me that was important for the record, but I indicated that I did not wish to pursue charges at this time. The responding officer, a younger man who listened carefully and did not rush me, noted everything. He told me that if the situation escalated or if I changed my mind, the documentation was there. The memory cards are in a fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet. My estate documents are updated, witnessed, and filed. My accounts are secured with 2-factor authentication and passwords that no one else knows. Gretchen and I have not spoken since Thanksgiving. Patrick and I talk every Sunday. He brought the kids over last weekend, and Oliver helped me rake the backyard. Maisie found one of Carolyn's old recipe cards tucked inside a cookbook on the shelf and wanted to know who wrote it. I told her. She was quiet for a second. Then she held onto the card with both hands very carefully and asked if she could help me make the cookies on it someday. I said yes. I said we'd make them at Christmas. I am 62 years old. I run 5Ks. I maintain my own home. I tend my own wife's garden. I maintain my late wife's garden. I cook real meals 4 nights a week. I assess risk for a living. And I have spent the last several months making absolutely certain that the people who love me, and the few who perhaps love what I have more than they love me, cannot mistake my quietness for weakness, my patience for surrender, or my home for an asset to be managed. Carolyn used to say that the most powerful thing a person can do in a hard moment is absolutely nothing, until they've thought it all the way through. She was right about almost everything. She was especially right about that. Set your boundaries. Have the hard conversations. And do it before you need to. Do it when your head is clear and your hands are steady and there's no pressure bearing down. Because pressure, in my experience, comes when you least expect it. And the only thing better than knowing how to respond to it is having already prepared.